Hey everyone, Nicholas here. This is just a brief snippet from this week's Patreon episode. If you like what you hear, you can unlock this and every other Patreon episode for just $5 a month. Head on over to patreon.com/Furidashi for that and more.
Doing the academic work to kind of posit and theorize and understand these fundamental, like explicit and implicit ways of telling story or just designing mechanics, right?
Yeah.
Has actually helped me as a systems designer create the tools for narrators because I could go, hey, are you trying to tell an explicit moment of narrative, right? In a cutscene. Like you have to tell the person, right?
Yeah.
Or are you just, is this an implicit narrative? Like you just see that she's kind of walking really slowly, like
Yeah.
it's an NPC, and then you don't really
Yeah.
know why,
Yeah.
right? Maybe she's injured. Maybe you get closer and she's like, she relates, she's pregnant. Like
Yeah.
maybe she's a zombie now. Like that's what I'm saying. Like now it's an enemy, right? So now you see this woman, right, who you were like, oh, she's walking slowly, maybe she's injured. Oh, maybe she's like she's pregnant. Actually, maybe I should help her. And you get closer and realize that now she wants to eat your brains. And you're like, oh my gosh, like what are I just felt three different emotions, right?
Yeah.
That is narrative. Like that is the reaction of you for getting an implicit narrative, right? So I
Yeah.
think that it's made me, I guess, talk better. Yay. So like go past Lauryn, but it's become a demon because as people are referencing my old work, I knew that my model was flawed. And so
Yeah.
this is what we're going to try to
Not
exercise today is
flawed.
to kind of
Underdeveloped.
underdeveloped. My
Underdeveloped, I
model
think.
was underdeveloped because it was both. Hold on though. If you go back and you read my thesis, just FYI, it was simultaneously, and as this is in a lot of early academic work, it was simultaneously underdeveloped and overdeveloped. I have to admit that I should have stopped when I had the core of the model.
Yeah.
And the core of the model is that first thing that everybody, rightfully, thankfully at least, referenced, which is the mechanics lead to context, right? Lead to the reactions, lead to emotions, right? Then go
Yeah.
back to mechanics, right? Thankfully, thankfully, everybody that reads my work did not read the rest of my thesis. Thank you. I appreciate you. Nobody else should either, because then I over extrapolated. I tried to kind of fight, right, with what is a system, right? I was fighting with the systems, right, that support these things.
Yeah.
And what I'm finding right now, like TLDR, here's the demon exercising part, Nicholas, is that in my head last night, in my semi lucid state, I'm going, no, the system is actually one of those bubbles. And my original model, I'd have to go back and like find. I have to go back and like search my own
Yeah.
fucking model here.
So I think
But basically, yeah,
there is some
sad.
contextual information that I think we need to add in here because you and I have had these conversations in the past, but our listeners have not heard this. So you've mentioned Foucault a couple of times now, and something that Lauryn is assuming that you all need to be aware of is that what we're talking about are questions of subjectivity, not psychology. And what do I mean by that? Psychology is actually sort of well integrated within game design. Like that's kind of par for the course. But what we're talking about is not necessarily the sort of like presumption of like personal identity as this thing that is sort of like endemic to you, but rather something that is constructed contextually in the interface between yourself and some like either game system or like media experience that has been created for you. Now that falls much more into the territory of subjectivity. And so the reason why Lauryn has read Foucault in the past and is also referring to him without being explicit is because within a lot of his later writings, especially, he has this concept of what is usually translated into English as subjectivation. So you can kind of think of it as like subjective activation as a kind of portmanteau. It means something slightly different in French, but that's close enough. What subjectivation is this idea that sort of like you don't develop into yourself so much as you train yourself to be yourself. And so he uses the metaphor of the athlete. Like, the athlete is someone who is adapting themselves to particular circumstances, be it like, the conditions of like whatever athletic contest that they're engaged in. And they train their body, they reshape their body in a particular way so as to be better suited for that particular thing. So, for example, like in my case, I have a swimmer's body. Like I have all of the weird, like upper body, but like narrow everything else that a swimmer has because I have trained my body to be good at swimming. A similar thing can be done with your like subjective experiences. And Foucault references particularly a lot of ancient philosophers and also some early modern philosophers as well, who were really deeply invested in this idea that you could sort of train your mind to be adapted to historical circumstances that surround you, particularly traumatic historical circumstances. And so what Lauren is talking about in terms with relationship to a game is like, then how do you create a media experience, in this case a video game, that then elicits a particular behavior from a player in such a way that they can have certain emotional and also narrative experiences? And that assumes that that only happens in that moment of interface. So the idea that sort of you turn to Foucault to understand this is because his whole concept of subjectivity is based on that idea that like who you are in a given moment is a function of that sort of interface between yourself and reality.